All right, cool. You guys are being recorded. That sounded good, though. Sounded very good. All right, cool. No worries. Don't worry, I don't have any young kids watching these videos, so, you know, it's all good. True. Not that young. Yeah, not that young. All right, cool. So today we're going to be covering Flask, which you guys might be wondering, what is that? Basically, it's what we call a micro framework. So it's a framework that we can use to build a web server. Now, it's not super opinionated, and it doesn't come with crazy amounts of features, but it allows us to create something nice and simple. So this is the way that we can kind of get off the ground and running, creating our own little servers. All right. So the first thing that I've done is I've created a folder for our little Hello Flask demo project. And as you can see, there's nothing in there yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this little integrated terminal here in my VS Code. If you guys wonder how I'm doing that, so it's going to be control and then the backtick symbol. All right. And when you open up this terminal, let me make it a little bit bigger here. So obviously the terminal itself is just going to open up in whatever folder that you're currently in. All right. And one thing that we're going to do pretty much every time that we start projects in Python is that we're going to create a new virtual environment. All right. You guys probably came across this on the platform and wondering, what's this for? Why am I creating this? So what a virtual environment is for is it allows us to create a specific area for all of the dependencies of whatever project that we're working on. So in the platform, I believe they recommend just create a folder for all of your environments, and you can create one for, say, all of your Flask projects, that sort of thing. I think what I'm going to do today, though, is I'm actually going to create the environment right here in this folder that we're in. Okay? And part of the reason I'm doing that is because I find that people struggle a little bit navigating up and down, traversing up and down their folder structures in their computer.
Oh, the command prompt and whatnot?
Yeah, exactly, in the command prompt. So here, if we create the environment right inside the folder that we're working in, it shouldn't cause us too much grief, right? Okay.
How do you open the terminal again? Control.
So it's going to be control and then backtick.
Backtick.
Yeah, which is up to the left of your 1 key.
Oh,
Yeah, well, right. The other one's the backtick, and then the other one's the tilde. Right. Okay,
oh my
cool.
God, I've never
Good point.
seen backtick. Is that an apostrophe? That's
So now that we've got that open, let's create our virtual environment. Okay. Does anyone know what the command is for that?
for Python, right?
Yeah.
You do Python. Oh, so you have to call and then activate the. But that's if you've already created the file structure.
So we have to create the environment first
Okay.
before we activate it.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So how do we create the environment? Anybody? That's okay if nobody knows. I'll just fill it in, but no.
Oh yeah.
-m, and then we say venv, right, saying that we want to create this virtual environment. Now I'm just going to call my virtual environment env. You guys could potentially call it something else if you like. All right. So notice here that it's created this little folder right in the project that we're in right now. So that's cool. So in order to actually use this environment, what else do I need to do with it? I need to activate it. So right now it's not activated. And the reason I know that is because if I'm looking at my terminal here, there's not a parentheses surrounding the name of my environment. And we'll see that once I have activated it, that changes. And I'll know, okay, my environment's activated. So the way that we do that is we're going to say source. And this is slightly different for Windows users, so just be aware of that. And then we're going to say the name of the environment. And then there's a subfolder called bin or bind, and then activate is beneath that. So you can see now that I've activated my environment, it's here inside these parentheses. Cool.
So then for me it would be env scripts.
It would be what?
Env scripts.
Yeah, I believe that's correct. Okay. Yeah, scripts and then /activate. Okay. So now that we've got this sort of virtual environment activated, we're going to want to install the things that we actually want to use, right? Now, this is a Flask demo, and that's basically the only dependency that we're going to need, okay? So, can anyone tell me how I install dependencies from within a virtual environment? Or just in general when we're working in Python?
Install and then Flask.
Pretty close. Jessica? Pip. Our old friend Pip. So we have this package manager that we're using called Pip. So what we're going to say is pip install. Whoops. Not pimp. Install Flask. Okay. And there we go. You can see it was collecting Flask and so forth. So once this thing has been installed, now we can actually use this in this project. So we're in good shape. Okay, now the first thing I want to do is actually create a file which will sort of act as my main server file. So let's just create this file, server.py. Okay, cool. And I'm going to not close my terminal, but when you exit out, it won't be visible, but you can still bring it back up. So it's still going to be the same terminal. All right, so now what I want to do inside this .py file is I actually want to import some things from Flask. Okay. So the syntax that we do that in Python is going to look something like this. So we'll say from Flask. So this is the library that we just installed, right? I'm going to import Flask with a capital F. What does that look like? For all of you guys that attended yesterday's whiteboard lecture. It's a class, right? We just imported a class. Cool. All right. Cool. So I'll save that. The next thing that we're going to do is we want to actually create our application, our main application. So the way that we do that is I'm just going to create a variable called app. And I'm going to set that equal to creating a new instance of the Flask class. Okay? You guys remember how we create a new instance of a class?
Oh, you have the class name followed by the arguments that the class requires. But
Yeah, so we're going to follow it with a set of parentheses. It's sort of like we're invoking a function.
okay.
Right? Okay, cool. So we'll say Flask here. And then we're going to pass in this globally available variable called dunder name. Have you guys seen this yet in your Python studies?
Yeah, I've heard of
Dunder name. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so what we're going to do actually before we even sort of run this thing, let's print out what name is so you guys can see what this actually does. Okay, and I'll just comment this out down here. So all we're doing right now is we're just importing the Flask class and we're going to print out what the variable name, what that equals, right? So if I open that terminal back up, I'll clear it, and then let's just go Python and then the name of our file, so server.py. Okay? So what did that return when I printed main? It printed out dunder main. Okay? So what that means is that I'm actually running this file directly. Now, if another file was requiring this file, it wouldn't print out that way. It wouldn't say dunder main. It would actually say the name of the file, which would be server. Okay? All right. If I was requiring this file, in other words, if I was importing this file from somewhere else, then printing name would not give me dunder main like this. It would actually give me server because that's the name of the file. Server.py, right? Okay. So when we create an instance of the Flask class, we need to pass this variable in, this globally available variable called dunder name. Okay. Now, the thing that I'm going to do towards the end of this, so let's get rid of this, is I'm actually going to run my application. So you guys will see in the platform something like this. If dunder name equals dunder main, whoops,
Main is server.
Yeah, so all
Main.
we're check. What's that?
Which one is which? Which one is server dot
Is that double equal, right? That's a double equal.
Is it double equal? Yeah. So what's happening here is we're just checking to make sure, are we running this file directly?
Okay.
Okay. So if we are, we want to do something with it. We actually want to run our application.
Got it.
All right. So if that's true, I'm going to put this colon here, go down to the next line, and we'll say app.run. Okay. So what does this look like we're doing? We know we've created an instance of the Flask class, right? It's called app. And when we say .run, what are we doing there? You guys saw?
You're
You're the function.
yeah, run the file.
Looks like we're invoking a method, right?
But you're running the file. Is that? Oh, I'm assuming that that's what you would do.
Well, running the file is happening from the terminal. So when I say
okay.
Python
I
server.py,
thought
right?
this was a way of accessing the
Yeah. No, so what we're doing here is we're invoking this method called run that's available to instances of the Flask class.
Gotcha.
All right. And then we can also pass in some different arguments here. You can see it's telling us some of the different arguments that it's looking for. We can pass in a host if we want. We can pass in a port number if we wanted. So if we wanted it to be different than the default, I think the default is 5,000. We can specify if we want debug to be turned on, which I am going to turn on. Debug is very nice because it allows us to, every time we make a change to our code, it just reloads right on the spot. So we don't have to like keep shutting it down and rerunning it, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's nice. Load.env, we're not really going to play with that. Options, there are apparently some other options too. But for now, let's just turn on debug. So we'll say debug equals true. Okay, cool. Now let me clear this out. Let's run it again. So Python server.py. What was the problem here? Debug mode on. Oh, I'm already using port 5000. All right, never mind. I guess I will pass in a port number. Apparently I'm using 5000 on something else. I think I know what it is. So if I want the port to be 3000, I can do that. All right, so let's try this and see if we can get it right. A port is just something on your computer that allows you to basically run a process. So I can run a process on port 1000 or port 3000, but if I already had another process running on that same port, they're going to conflict and it won't allow me to do that. Okay, so let's do that one more time. Whoa, keep getting these messages that are like obstructing your view. I apologize about that. Okay, here, so you can see we are actually running our server. This is cool, and it's telling us here we can access it here from, yeah, port 3000, right? So if I go over here to my browser, let's see if we can load it up. So we'll say localhost 3000. And there we go. So notice how here it's saying not found. The requested URL was not found on the server. If you entered the URL manually, please check your spelling, try again. Okay. Now what would happen if I just went to some bad address on the internet, right? Some allthisstuff.com. We would see something like this. You see how the page looks quite different here from the error page that we just saw? So the 404 error that we're getting here in our own application is just saying, hey, that page that you just tried to access does not exist on this particular server.
No HTML, no CSS.
Yeah, so there was nothing, the server didn't really return anything back except this error page.
But you are accessing the server.
Mhm.
It's not the, yeah.
Yeah, so you can tell. So if I were to turn this off, for instance, we turn off our server and we go back and I try to refresh this, well, you can see it's something like this, right? You can see the server is now off. All right. Cool. So let's run it one more time. So the thing that we're missing here is that we haven't actually created some kind of page that we can give back to the browser. Like, hey, you visited the index route. Here's an HTML page to show to the user, right? Okay, cool. So let's talk about how to do that. So we can create a route in Flask like this. We can say app.route, and then I can specify what route I want it to be. So if I want it to be the index route, I'm just going to pass in this / like that. Okay. So the index route is basically just the root of your application. There's nothing after that, 3000 that we saw there. No slash, no nothing. Okay. Notice here that we have something interesting that you guys might not have seen. You see that little at symbol? There? That's called a decorator. Okay. And what the decorator does is it means that it's going to decorate or give the function that follows it some kind of special powers. All right. So when we write a function that comes right after this little app.route here, we're saying we want this function to handle this particular route right here. Okay? So I can create a function right here. We'll just call it index. Okay? So this is going to be the function that's going to handle this particular route. All right? And every time you guys use decorators, what comes right after, that will be the function again that handles that route. All right? Now what do we want to do? Let's just return something out. Let's just return a little message to our user. So we'll say return hello Flask. Okay, because we're excited. And let's load this up again. And there we go. So we've created our first web server, right? Super easy.
How did you write that again?
The hello Flask?
Yeah.
So here inside my def index, all I did is I just returned that string.
Yeah, but how do I get to that the host 3000?
Oh, so what I did was, notice here, when I did app.run,
Yeah.
I specified a port of 3000. Now, if you don't put in a port argument, I think it just defaults to 5000. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool, so that's kind of nice. We've created our own little web server here. I mean, there's not much to it. I can also potentially put in some HTML tags inside there if I want to. So if I want to put in some h1 tags, go like this, right? And then we'll go back here and just reload it, and there we go. So we've got an actual HTML string. However, do we think that we want to write HTML pages like this? Yikes. Can you imagine sort of concatenating all of these different strings together into one long jumbled thing?
Would not be fun.
What a mess, right? Okay. So the good thing is that Flask gives us a way to handle this. Okay? We have a function that we can import. We don't have to write it ourselves, which is nice, called render template. Okay? So if I come down here, let's say I just want to render a template. I'm just going to take this out here, and we'll say return render template. Notice how I'm getting a little bit of a squiggly underline over here, and you guys will probably notice this on your own too. And if you hover over this, it's saying here, undefined variable render template. So why is it telling me that? Do I have access to this variable?
Oh, I guess not. Because you're trying to reference one in Flask, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, so.
Okay, so this is a function, but of course, if I haven't written this function here in this file, nor have I imported it from anywhere, obviously your editor is going to say, hey, you don't have access to this variable.
Okay.
Right.
So then maybe you could do like import all of Flask. Because you're doing, it looks like from Flask, import Flask. Are you only importing one part of Flask?
Correct, yeah, right now, so what you're saying is we could do something like this.
Because if it exists, then it exists.
If we were to come down here and say from Flask, whoops, we could potentially import everything, right, if we just do this asterisk here. But I'm really only trying to import the things that I'm using for now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
All right, so So, but where we can get this render template function, fortunately we don't have to write this on our own. It's actually something that's available with Flask. So we'll go up here to our import and say, let's also import render template. Okay? And what the render template function is going to require is it's going to require a reference to the template that we want to render. So we just need to provide what is the file name that we want to give back to the browser. So let's say we're going to render an index.html file. Now the question is, well, where do I put this file? Do I just put it like in the root of my project folder? That's actually not where Flask is going to look for it. Flask is going to look for it inside of a folder called templates. So let's create that folder.
That's a file.
I created a file? Oh, I did. Jeez. Nice. Delete that. Yes, move to trash. Okay, cool. So let's create this folder. Templates. And then inside this templates, I'm just going to create my index.html because that was the template that I said I was going to render, right? So let's do index.html. Cool. And then hopefully you guys know this little trick. If I put in this exclamation point, I just tab off of that. Whoa, I get all this HTML boilerplate. Nice. I don't need to write that stuff. Cool. So inside here, if I want my H1 to kind of look similar to how I had it before, I can say H1 hello Flask. Save that guy there. And then let's save our server.py so that it's reflecting this part, right? So we're now rendering a template. Okay? And we're still essentially seeing the same thing. So, not much has changed here. All I have is this H1 tag with hello Flask inside of it. So that's pretty cool. What if I want to bring in some actual styles to this page? If I want to change things up a little bit, make it look interesting.
Going for CSS, would you also put that in template too?
CSS. Yes. Or
So where we're going to do our linking is going to happen inside the index.html
Oh,
file.
Oh, okay.
Right. So, but just like templates, Flask is going to be looking for our static files inside of a certain directory as well. So that would be our static directory. So I can create another folder to house any static files that I may want to use.
Like
So-
images and things? Okay.
Sure. So for instance, let's just create this static folder. And let's say I want to create a style.css. And then we'll say body. Make the background light blue. All right. Sometimes it's good to sort of make things really obvious and then just apply the styles. That way you know, okay, it's loading up correctly. So that's nice. All right. So inside our index.html, we want to link this style sheet, right? And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say link. Now the only thing that we need to know is what is the href of the style sheet that we're trying to load, right? Okay. And what we're going to do is something like this. This is going to look a little strange for you guys at first. So I'm going to do these little double mustache tags. And what that means is that I'm going to output something specific to my template. So that when this template is rendered, it's going to dynamically sort of inject this little part that I want. And to do that, what I want to do is I'm going to invoke this function that we have called URL4. And then I'm going to say I want it to be for my static folder. And then I'm going to say the file name equals, in this case, my file name was style.css, right? Okay, hopefully that's like semi-clear. Let me open that up so you can see it a little bit better. So I've got the double mustache tags, which means that we're outputting this thing to the template, and then I'm invoking this function called URL4, passing it in the name of the static folder, and then I'm saying I want the file name called style.css. So let's see if we can load that guy up. And there we go. Now we actually have our background, and if we go and view the page source, you can see that it ultimately converted the href into this, static/stop.
So it created.
So this is what it ultimately injected into the template, right?
Created a URL.
It's sort of a process of substitution.
Yeah.
So when the page is rendered, it said, okay, this is what we're going to put inside those double curly braces. Okay? And we're going to be using those a lot, so you'll get used to this whole double mustache tag sort of thing, right?
So it's like an easier way of coming up with a URL, kind of?
Yeah, it's sort of like a guaranteed way to make sure that whatever, rather than me hoping that my URL is right,
Yeah.
I'm going to use this built-in function that will ensure that I'll pull it up correctly. Yeah. Okay. So under the hood, Flask is using this templating engine called Jinja 2. So you guys may or may not have heard of it. I'll try to remember to put a link to it in the schedule. If you guys want to see just like all the different things that are available inside Jinja 2, you can take a look at that as well. All right. There are really only a few things though that we're going to be doing in Jinja that are the most useful, and this is one of them. So when we substitute something, again, double mustache tags. All right, 2 curly braces. All right, excellent. Now, what if I wanted to actually pass in some information to this template? I mean, right now, all I've got is hello Flask. I mean, there's no information here. What if I wanted to pass in a user's information or something like that? Say I want to show a page for AJ, and it just has AJ's information in it.
You can do that a lot of different ways, I suppose, but like which specific?
So let's talk about how we can do it. So let's go back into our server.py. And here, when I'm going to render my index, I can create say a dictionary that just has sort of different bits of information about AJ. So we could just say, I'm going to create this variable called user, which will be a dictionary. And then let's just put in some pieces of information. So we'll say first name, am I spelling that right? Arjun?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Last name. I don't know how to spell your last name, however. Uh-huh. Okay. Okay. K-I. Cool. And then let's say his email is just going to be a@p.com. It's a pretty cool email address, right? Now what I'm going to do is I want to pass this along to my template to render this out. Okay? So what we can do as a second argument to this function, I can provide some variable that I want my template to have access to. So I'm going to say user. And this is going to be what my template gets to use. It's going to be a variable called user, and I'm going to set it equal to the user that I just created right here. Okay. Now that syntax may be a little bit confusing for you guys, so I think I'm going to change this a little bit. I'm going to say, let's just say this is actually AJ here. Oops. AJ, and then we'll say the user equals AJ. Okay? So I've created this dictionary called AJ with all of his pieces of information. Then I'm saying I want the template to have a variable called user, and I want it to be equal to AJ's dictionary. Okay? So I'm going to save this, and then let's go back into our template and make some changes so that we can actually show this, this AJ dictionary that we just passed through. So I'll just create some p tags here. We'll say first name. And then I'm going to use my double mustache tags again, because again, I'm trying to inject something into the template when it's given back to the browser. So what we can say is user, and then does anyone know how I access his first name?
Dot. Oh no, user.
It's not going to be dot notation. Yeah, it's going to be brackets, right? Yep. So we'll say brackets first name. Okay? And then I also have to close off my mustache tags over here.
Oh.
So is this like interesting? So it's like the database fills the HTML, and you're able to reference that kind of little data.
Yeah, now understand that we don't even have a database going on here,
Oh,
right?
okay. So
We've just simply hard-coded a variable in our server.py and then passed it along to the template to do something with it. Okay. So if I go back here and render our page, here we go. We're seeing his first name. Nice, right? Okay, and I can do the same thing with all of his other pieces of information. One little shortcut you guys might want to know too is if you want to duplicate lines of code, you can hold down the Option key and Shift and arrow, and just kind of go like that.
is that
Option key and arrow.
Option, Shift, and then arrow.
Is
So
that-
either up or down. If you do up, it'll duplicate it upwards. Otherwise, downwards.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty nice.
It saves 30 hours of my
it's
time.
Alt Shift.
Yeah, it's a huge time saver.
For Windows, it's up there.
It's
Wait, what is it for Windows? Alt Shift?
Alt Shift.
Alt Shift?
Yeah.
Alt Shift.
Alt shift arrows.
Oh, okay.
That's
Oh,
so
oh.
useful.
Yeah.
I just found out I learned that yesterday.
Yeah, you guys will get a lot of mileage out of that. Totally. All right, so now we've got his last name that we're going to put in. I'll also put his email too so that we can see his whole profile. Email. Cool. Let's render the page again. So now we're seeing everything about our user. Pretty nice, right? So now these templates have become somewhat dynamic. It's not just us creating some static HTML that's never going to change. The HTML is actually going to change depending on some factors that we choose, right? Okay. So what if I wanted to display more than one user? I mean, maybe AJ is not my only user. I've got some others too that I want to pass along to my page. How can I do that?
Will you add that into your dictionary?
So rather than just having one dictionary, maybe I can create a nice little structure, a list that had a number of different dictionaries in it, right? So that I can show multiple users. All right, cool. So let's do that. I'll just come down here. We'll create this list of users. Oops. So it's going to be a list, and then I'm going to bring down AJ and put him in there. He'll still be the first one. My indentation got thrown out of whack there. Okay, and then another little shortcut too you guys can use is that if you're on a line of code that you don't want, that you just want to delete the entire code, you can press Command and then X, or Control and X if you're on Windows. So that'll just get rid of the whole line. Okay, cool. So I want to have my second user in here. So I'll just put a comma and start another dictionary here. I'll make my second user Jessica. Alright. Last name. I wish I could just tell my computer to type things. You know what I mean? Like, do this for me. j@c.com. Yeah, someday. Great. So instead of just passing user to my template, I now have this list of users, right? Okay. So we're going to say, instead of user, we'll say users. And I'll probably change this variable name too to make it a little bit more clear. So we'll say, or we'll just call this user list. Okay? I've got a user list that has 2 dictionaries in it. And then down here I'm going to say, I want my template to have access to a variable called users, and I'm going to set that equal to this user list that I just created. Excellent. All right, so we'll save that. Now what we want to do is, rather than just showing one user's information, I'm going to want to pass through every user in my list and show their information. So what might be a nice sort of format that we can use to do that? I'm going to use a table. Kind of old school, but you know, gets the job done. So we'll create a little HTML table down here. Table. Oh, actually, let me show you guys another little nifty thing while we're at it. So I'm going to create a table, and then inside there, I'm going to create a t-head element, which is the head of my table. Then I'm going to have a t-row, which is tr. And then I'm going to have a th, which is a table header. And I want to have 3 of those because I'm going to have 3 headings. I'm going to have the first name, the last name, and the email heading times 3. Now watch this. I can go up a couple more levels and then make a t-body. Then I can make a t-row. Then I can make 3 tds. Now look at this. It's telling me that it's going to create this nice little structure for me based on what I just typed right there. You guys like seen any of these Emmet autocomplete things that you have access to?
No.
It's pretty amazing. So what that little caret or bracket is telling us is that inside this table I want to have a t-head element. And then inside that t-head element I want to have a tr element. Okay? And then the little asterisk is just saying I want 3 of this thing. I want 3 of the th elements. Cool. So now when I finally press tab, look what happened. It created the whole table structure for me. Super nice, right? So now I can actually tab through these guys as well. I can say first name, last name,
Tab.
email. Yeah, if I tab, it'll take me to these other fields, right? Okay. So now what we want to do, we're trying to iterate through this user list. What's kind of a good structure for looping through things that you guys have learned? A for loop, right? Yeah, let's try to do that. So we learned about this nice one earlier today in the Python Olympics where we could do something like for item in list. We can do that here too, inside of our template, right? So the way that we do it is instead of doing double mustache tags, I'm going to use this % to say that I'm trying to create some sort of a structure flow change here. So I'm going to try to do some looping here. So I'll say for user in users. Okay, and then notice how at the end of this I also need to have that % as well. So if we're doing curly brace followed by a %, it means maybe we're going to do some looping or something else, maybe like a conditional check. All right, so in this case we're just doing a loop. And then I need to end that loop as well down here. So I'll say end for. And what this should do is it should go through this thing twice because I have 2 users that I've just passed along to my template, right? Cool. So now what I want to do is for each user, I want to actually obviously output that person's first name, the last name, and the email. So how did I say we can output things to the template again? Double mustache tags, right? Exactly. So we're gonna use that again. I'm gonna say like this. The variable that I now have access to is user. This is the individual user that I'm looking at in that, that iteration of the loop. So I can say user first name. And then we'll close it out like that.
And the close bracket.
Yeah, in the close bracket, right. Yeah, that's probably a good idea to put that in there. All right, and so what I'm going to do, just to kind of make my life easier here, is I'm just going to duplicate this down and then just change these guys. So last name, email. Okay, so we did a lot of work here, and we've just created this little loop where we're going through all of our users. Let's see if it renders out the way that we're expecting. No, it didn't. User is undefined. Really? Did I not pass users?
Oh, user
Users.
list. Wait, look up. Oh, users equals user list though. Yeah. Maybe try.
Or user in users.
Because you said it as users.
Why is that undefined? Debugger. Huh. Anyone else who's coding along having the same issue? It's all good.
Did you end up changing, originally you had users just as user? Did you ever switch it?
Oh wait, hold on a second. I think it was still here in the template. Whoops. Okay, so here's the issue. I hadn't removed the original that we had right here, right? Okay, so let me get that out of there.
So more like the fact
Mhm.
that you had it as user list. Oh, learner. Go back to server.
Mhm.
You have it as user underscore list. That doesn't make a difference.
No, so this part can be kind of confusing, but the first thing is what the template is going to get to use. The template is going to have access to users. And then I'm setting this equal to that user list that I just created.
Okay.
Okay. So let's try that again. Okay, so now we're getting what we expect, right? We've got first name, last name, email. Cool. Now another thing that I can do using this Jinja templating is I can also do conditionals. So what if I only want to display an email address if it happens to be a@p.com? I mean, that's pretty trivial and you probably would never do that, but we could do that by asking a conditional. So if we go into our template here, and I'm going to do something like, oops. So let's just create, yeah, I feel you. All right. So if user, and then we'll say email equals, whoops, I didn't mean to do 3. So we'll say j@c.com. Then we'll display it, right? Otherwise, I'm just going to leave it as an empty TD element here. So then we always need to end our sorry. In this case, we're ending a conditional, so I need to say end if. All right. So let's go back and render this. So notice how I'm only rendering this email address because that's the only one that was j@c.com. Right? Okay. So if we're doing conditionals or if we're doing some kind of looping, you're going to use that syntax where it's the curly brace followed by the %sign. If we're just simply outputting something to the template, you will do 2 curly braces, double mustache.
Regular for loop syntax.
What?
Instead of the sign, can we use for something?
Not inside your template, no. Now, obviously, you can do that inside of a .py file. Yeah. So if we're doing templating and we want to loop through, it's going to look something like this. Okay. So that's all fine and good if I'm just sort of hard coding some variables. What if I were actually getting this stuff from a database? What would that sort of look like? Let's say I was making a SQL query and I was trying to reach in and just go get all of my users.
Would you use render template again?
So yeah, I mean, we would still be rendering our template, but what kind of query would we run to select all of our users?
In MySQL database.
Mm-hmm. Did you guys get to do any of the MySQL stuff?
We
In web
did,
fonts?
but we don't know how to reference like variables inside of MySQL, outside of it. Like
No, that's true. So all I'm asking is, let's say you were using MySQL Workbench or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And you wanted to write a query to just go grab all of your users. Because probably that's what we'd be doing in a real application rather than just hard coding this stuff. We'd want to go get it from a database, right? What would that query look like?
no idea what the syntax is.
Select all ID this.
Yeah, so it'd be something like this, right? Select, and then we would use star from users.
Oh,
Yeah, so if we had a
in
users table.
MySQL syntax, we could
Yeah.
do that in here. Okay.
Well, we're not going to do
But that
MySQL within the context of Flask. It
Right.
used to be part of the program. It's not anymore. But I just wanted to sort of put that out there. Like, let's say we were going to go write a SQL query to go get our users before we render the template.
I see.
Right. That's kind of how the actual SQL query would look.
Right.
Okay, cool. All right, excellent. Another thing that you guys are probably going to be doing is you will be taking in some data from the user. Okay, you guys know what data usually comes in through, what kind of HTML elements we'd be using for taking in data.
Where? Oh.
Input, okay. And then what usually wraps the input?
Form.
A form. Yeah, exactly. So if we wanted to have some kind of a form on this page where we could take in a new user, say, let's create that. So up above here, oops, I'll just create a little form. There we go. We have these attributes that we need to provide a form. We need to say, where do we want this to route to once we submit the form? That's what the action stands for. Okay, so I'm just going to create a route here. We'll say the route is going to be /users because I'm trying to create a new user, right? And then there are these there's this method attribute that we need to provide as well. Now, typically when we're just loading up a web page in our browser, the method that's using is called get. That means that we're just kind of getting a page, we're getting some information, right? There's another method that we're going to use, which is called post. And usually that means that we're trying to create some change on the server. We're trying to either make something or change something. So we'll say this is going to be a post request when that form submits, right?
What was it? The other?
What was the what?
The other has another method.
Oh, yeah.
Get post and has another one.
Oh, are you thinking of put or something like that, or delete, or so there are some different HTTP methods. So there's get and post. These are the main ones that we can use with HTML. There are some other methods that you guys will come across in the mean stack, which is us using JavaScript to do them. Okay, but in terms of just a regular HTML form, those are your options. It's either going to be a get request or a post request. One of those. Okay, I'll show you guys the difference between the two kind of in a minute, but let's just create some inputs inside here where we can take in some information from the user. So if I create a user input here, let's just say this is first name, create another one, last name, and then finally we'll take in that email too, right? Whoops, what happened? Oh, jeez, something went wrong. Group. Okay, cool. And then we'll take in an email, and then this will be of type email. Okay. And then, of course, at the end of our form, we also want to provide some kind of a submit button to allow them to submit it. Submit. All right, good deal. Let's just render our page and make sure that our form showed up. There it is. Very nice. Lovely. Cool. Now, the only thing is, do we have a route that's going to be able to handle this form submission?
No, you can only access users. You can't put users into the dictionary. Not yet, right?
Well, yeah, so the thing is, right now our application only has one route. It only has that index route.
Okay.
So I'm going to have to create another route where I can handle this form submission.
So like out from the dictionary and then one that can go into the dictionary.
So over here, right now I just have this one route. Let's create another one that will handle this form submission, right? Okay, so I'm going to say app.route again, using our decorator. And then inside there, I'm going to say users, because that's the route that I wanted. The other thing that I need to say is that this particular route is going to handle post requests, because otherwise Flask is thinking it's just going to be a get request by default. So if we leave the second argument off, it's going to assume that it's a get request. But I'm trying to make a post request here, so I'll say methods equals, and then you need to provide a list of acceptable methods. So the only method that I'm going to accept here is going to be a post request. So inside the list, I'm just going to say I'm taking a post request, and that's it. Right? Then we'll just create a little I'm just going to call this function process. All right. Now the question is, how do I actually access my form data? Because somebody just submitted, the first name, last name, email. I want to actually see it, right? Okay. So for that, we're going to need to import something else from Flask. It's going to be called request. The request is going to give us it's going to give us access to whatever form data was submitted. So we have a request. And then in order to look at that form data, I'm just going to print it out. And I'm going to say print out the request.form. So request.form will be all of the form data that the person just submitted to me. Okay. Now after that happens, I want to just send the user on his way or her way back to the index page. That's all I want to do. Just print out what they submitted and send them back to the index page. Cool. So I'm going to use this function called redirect. And I want to redirect again back to the index page. Can you guys see the little squiggly line under there?
Yeah. Is that
What
spell
happened
check?
again?
Got you for it.
Yeah, how about that, right? We don't actually have this function available to us, so we're going to need to get it from Flask, because I don't want to write it. Right?
That's right.
That'd be terrible. All right. So let's just import that guy as well. Cool. Now we have it. So all we're doing again is we're just going to submit the form, print out what came through the form, and then we're just instantly going to redirect them back to the index route. All right. Now where is this going to print? When I print this out, is it going to show up like in my browser console tools? Let me show you guys what I mean by that. So down here we've got our little console, right? Is it going to print out down here?
Yeah. Print all the requests, right? Not the return.
Let's have a show of hands. How many people think that print is going to show up down here? Okay, roughly about half. Okay, cool. So it won't. It's going to show up. It's going to show up in our terminal here that we're using to run the project,
So not the console.
not the actual browser
Oh, the
console.
browser. Okay.
Yeah, so this terminal that we've got here, and if I want to make it a little more obvious, I could also put as a first argument to the print function, let's just say a bunch of line breaks. Okay, so that it's nice and spaced out. All right, cool. So let me render this page one more time. We'll submit the form. So I'll put in first name, last name, email. Okay. Cool. Notice how I got right back to this page. There's nothing on it, so the redirect worked. Now if I go back here, we should see that my form data is available inside here. So it's this thing called an immutable multi-dict. Okay? Multi-dict.
Oh.
Sorry, I really don't want to say that, but I have to.
That's a tuple?
It's a what?
It's a tuple?
Yeah, you can see that it has multiple tuples inside of it, right? So it looks kind of like a list, and then you've got these different tuples. But we can also access these things in the way that we would kind of expect. So what if I just wanted to print out the first name? I could go like this, request.form, and then first name. Let's do that. So I'll just submit my first name, but nothing else. And then if we go back to the terminal, you see I got what I expected, right? So I can still access these different keys, as it will, of the immutable multi-dict if I want to. All right.
If you wanted to access the values, you do that too.
Well, that actually gave me back the value, right? So when I printed this, it gave me back the value that came through the form. Yeah, exactly. All right. So the other thing I wanted to show you guys too is just kind of the difference between a post request and a get request. So let's say we did want to accept get requests here as well. I can add that to my list of accepted methods if I want. And then here inside the index.html, I could change this method to get. I could also leave that attribute off entirely, and it would automatically be a get request. Okay. So let's see what happens here. If I go here, let me refresh this page, and then I'll just put in my first name. Notice how we got a big exception here, so that's a lot of fun. But what happened was when we submitted the form, you see how my information is showing up there in the address bar? That's what a GET request will do. It will actually, if we make a GET request by submitting a form, it's going to put all of those key values from the form up in the actual address bar. Okay. Now, most of the time, that's not the behavior that we want. So if I'm registering a new user and that user has submitted a password or something like that, I don't really want that showing up in my address bar, right? Sometimes it is useful, though, if let's say I'm doing a search on Google and I've just submitted my search term and I want to share that search with another person. I can copy that address and send it along the way, and then that person can access, that same URL with all of my search parameters filled out like that. Okay. We're not going to do a lot with GET requests through forms, but I just wanted to show you that that's essentially how that would look if we submitted a form with a GET request. Okay. You'd actually see the submitted information up in your address bar. Okay. All right. Finally, so let's just change that back to a post because we're not typically going to be doing that. So the last question that I have for you guys is this. Let me just refresh this. So when I submit this form, can you tell me how many requests are going to be made to the server? So remember, we're doing some different things. I'm going to submit it, and then we had that redirect going on, right? So after I hit the submit button, how many requests do you think are going to be made of the server? 3? Okay. 6. Okay.
So make
3's a pretty good guess. Where's it coming from?
Well, I'm just going to input your data.
Okay.
Send it, and then it goes back, right?
Yeah, so the submit itself is making one request because we're making a request to that /users route, right? Then we are redirecting back to the index, right? So that's creating another request. And then we have a third request, which is kind of sneaky. Remember we linked a style sheet here? The style sheet, so once this actual index page loads up, we're then going to make a request to our server for that style sheet. So that's the third right there.
So I was a little off. I got 3 right. But
Yeah, you got the number right, but sometimes it's like I don't really know why that's true.
Right.
And you guys can you can actually see this too. So if you open up your network tab here of your browser, if I submit this form again, we should see. I had this set up for something else. Okay, so notice here that we made a request to users, right? Then we made another request to the index page, which is what we expected, and then another one to our style.css. So those are the 3 requests that we were talking about.
Okay. How about the table we have out there? That's in your HTML file, right?
You're talking about this table right here?
Yeah. Actually, the data from the server file,
Mm-hmm.
right?
So again, this wasn't an actual request that was made. It was just we hard-coded a list of
Oh,
users, right? Yeah, and then we just looped through them in the template. All right. Cool. All right. Yeah, so we covered really a lot of ground here today, and I don't want to keep you guys much longer, but yes.
You recorded this, right?
I did.
Okay,
Yep.
good. It's going to be posted on that YouTube playlist?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
Same one.
Sweet.
Totally.
Because, yeah.
You need to rewatch it.
I need to rewatch it for sure.
Yeah, totally understandable, and I'm sure like some of this stuff was a little bit confusing. It's one of those things that as you get a little bit more exposed to it, it'll make more sense. So hang in there. All right, I'll stop the recording.